Thank you. Welcome back. And we have a lot of questions that have to do with the gun control bill that we talked about, and also ballot initiatives about the carbon tax. So.
All right, well, good deal. Feel free to dive on in.
Hi, my name is Casey, and I had a question about the bills that don't pass, like the carbon tax one. What happens to it?
So this year is the second year of our 2-year cycle here in Olympia. And so if bills don't pass this year and become law, they just kind of go away. They're not in the system anymore. If that had been the case last year, because last year was the first year of our 2-year cycle, last year, a bill that didn't pass would have still been alive this year. And we saw a handful of it this year. Bills that were introduced last year that didn't pass were still alive and could be worked this session in 2018. But 2018 is the second year of our 2-year cycle, our biennial budget cycle. And so bills that fail to pass this year just kind of go away, and a member would have to introduce them all over again from scratch next year if they wanted to pursue that that policy.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Madison, and I have a question about what would be considered like an invalid signature.
So an invalid signature would be either a duplicate. So say I sign once and then I sign twice again on a different signature card. So I can only be counted once, not twice. Another example of an invalid signature would be somebody who's not registered to vote here in Washington. Either they're not of age or they're registered in another state. They haven't registered here. So valid signatures have to be all persons who are of age, registered to vote here in Washington, and they can only be counted once each.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Alexis. I was wondering, how long can it take to get all the signatures needed for a ballot?
It can take a while. It depends on a couple of different factors. So they need about 259,000 and change, I think. Oftentimes what you'll see proponents of the ballot measure hire a signature gathering firm. And there are some firms that do this for a living. So they will hire people to go stand outside grocery stores or at the county fair or at sporting events, things like that, where a lot of people come and go. And so sometimes they'll hire people like that. Other times it can be an all volunteer basis. When it's only volunteers, it can take a while. And a good example would be last year from September through December, there was a group trying to get signatures for a different sort of an initiative to the legislature, but it had the same signature requirements. And that took them about 4 months to get the appropriate signatures. And so what you see now is the initiative on carbon tax has been filed, and they have until July 6th, I believe, to get the proper signatures. So they've got enough time. Yeah, July 6th. And so between now and then, they're probably going to hire a firm and try to go out and pay to get as many signatures as they can from folks all around the state. So it'll take them a few months to get up to that number that they need.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Tori, and I was wondering if you wanted the carbon tax bill to re-enter the Senate.
So if I personally want it to,
Yeah.
you know, I think that this is one of those issues where the legislature is probably, in my opinion, a better place to do the policy. And what I mean by that is it's sometimes hard in an initiative that's usually written by, proponents. Sometimes they're written by activists and others to get all of the nuance that you need when you're talking about a very big policy change like the carbon tax. And so typically I defer to the legislature. So when in doubt, my personal belief is that things should probably go through the legislative process because it gives an opportunity for the public to weigh in, they can make edits and changes. And that's one thing to recognize about the initiative process. The initiative, as it was filed a couple of weeks ago, they can't change anything now. There's no way to change any language in that initiative between now and when it hits the ballot in November. Not even down to a comma or a sentence change. That's locked in. And I think that when you're talking about big, complicated issues like this, they typically need to be worked a little bit. There's always going to be a nuance here or there that people recognize maybe ought to be changed. And so I typically prefer the legislative process to the initiative process. But that being said, sometimes when there's failure to act down here, you can't blame the proponents for pushing an initiative.
What might it take to pass?
Say again?
What might it take to pass?
Well, it's dead here in Olympia during the legislative session. And so there's no path right now. The session ends today. Today's the final day. And they have already announced that the carbon tax, Senate Bill 6203, is not going to move. It's not going to pass. And so that's why the proponents of the policy decided to push for an initiative. So what's it going to take to pass at the ballot box? It's going to take 50% plus one person to say that they like this idea out of all the people in the state who decide to vote in November.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Brianna, and I was wondering, why does an initiative need so many votes to go on a ballot?
So we need a lot of signatures to get on the ballot because the way they determine that number, it's a percentage of the registered voters who have voted in previous elections, in the previous general election. And so what they're saying is that we need to know that there is at least a certain segment of the population that wants to go forward with this before we put it on the ballot, because putting something on the ballot is an expensive process. And if you or me or anybody could just come up with anything, any great idea that we think we have without anybody else signing on, then we would probably see, how many people are in the state of Washington now? A couple million. We'd probably see a couple million different ideas on the ballot every year. And so the idea is that they just want to make sure that it's something that at least a minimum percentage of the folks out there want to see go forward.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Josh, and I was wondering about how you felt now that the carbon tax is dead.
So I did have a couple of clients who have been interested in the carbon tax. I think I've mentioned, a couple of times that I represent a tribe, and I know that tribes have been very supportive of the general policy because they recognize that investments need to be made in a lot of clean technology, clean energy, and pro-environmental issues. I've got a couple of other clients who were a little concerned about it. They were really concerned about the pass-through costs, some of the things that you guys brought up a couple of weeks ago when last we met, what it would mean for everyday families, whether it's a gas tax increase, whether it's a home heating costs on the heating bill. And so I don't think there's an easy answer. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure exactly where I fall yet, just personally. I think that I'm open-minded to see if this is something that we really need. But at the same time, I think that we need to be really wary and very aware of what it means to working families and everybody across the state in terms of how much it would cost them. And so I think that there's a good reason why tough policies like this take a while to move. It's not an easy thing to convince enough legislators, just like it isn't to convince a full classroom of students there that any one idea is the best way forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Um, do you ever lobby for initiatives?
So that gets to a really good question. What is the role of a lobbyist when it comes to an initiative? So as I mentioned earlier, once the initiative language is in and it's introduced, you can't change it. And so we're kind of locked in with this thing. If I have a client that is interested and likes the policy being pushed, then one of the things that lobbyists can do is be that conduit, be that intermediary between the initiative campaign and the client, to where the client, I'll brief the client on what the initiative does, and potentially, if the client is so inclined, they might want to give money to support the initiative. Either to help with paid signature gathering or to help with advertising in favor or against an initiative. And if we back up a little bit, so that's once the initiative is in. Lobbyists can have influence on how the initiative is drafted. It just depends on what the topic is and whether it's something that they're working on. I know a number of different lobbyists down here in Olympia had input on the carbon tax that eventually became the initiative that was filed a couple of weeks ago. They provided input to a group of stakeholders that said, okay, if you're going to do this, here's what it should look like. Or here's what we would want to see in there if we were going to support. Or if this is in there, maybe we'd oppose that. And so, the two main areas of engagement for lobbyists on an initiative are up front in helping draft, if that's something that you're part of that stakeholder group, or on the back end, with respect to trying to get your clients either in favor of it or opposed to it.
One more question.
Yeah.
How do you think, if the carbon tax passed, what do you think would be the impact in Washington?
If the carbon tax passes in November, I think what you're probably going to end up seeing is, well, I'll put it this way. There are two things that'll probably happen. One, whenever you have a big, complicated initiative, you might see lawsuits claiming that it's not, that it doesn't do everything that it says it's going to do. But putting aside the fact that you might see a lawsuit, and this is why it gets back to why I'm personally still a little up in the air on this, is I don't know exactly what the impact is going to be on the ground. The way the carbon tax with the initiative is written is it's a little bit higher priced than what the legislature was looking at. Now, that could mean that it has a larger impact on the environment, meaning, a greater ability to reduce emissions because the tax is higher. It could also mean higher costs for taxpayers than what the legislature was thinking. And you guys will recall when you were looking at the analysis earlier this session, about, for every roughly $10 or $12 of metric, or $10 or $12 per metric ton of emission, that results to about the same or equivalent in gas tax increase, about a 10-cent gas tax increase. So if the initiative is looking at $15 to start and going up $2 every year, well, that's 15 cents, 17 cents, 19 cents every year. And that can have a real impact. And so when you're trying to decide whether you're for something or against something like this, and when you're trying to parse out what the impact is going to be, you really have to look at all sides like that. Is it going to be something that actually effectuates the policy end? Is it going to help our environment? Is it going to reduce global warming? Is it going to, reduce emissions? And then on the other side, what's it going to mean for the people who have to pay for it? And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see if the voters want to have this tax, which they know is going to impact them.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Ian, and I was wondering, so the legislative is almost over for this year, but due to the wake of Florida and the controversy over guns, do you think there might be another gun control bill in the next legislative?
Yeah, there probably will be. So on the gun control stuff, we had a number of bills introduced this year, even before the tragedy in Parkland. And one of those bills passed. That was the bill on banning bump stocks. And you may have remembered that term after the Las Vegas tragedy last year, where these bump stocks, I'm not an expert on those, but essentially what they do is they help convert a semi-automatic weapon into essentially a machine gun, a fully automatic. And the legislature decided that we don't want that. We don't think that that's an appropriate thing to be selling and have out there, because the state has already banned machine guns. That's been on the books for a while. And so this effectively makes guns machine guns. So they said, okay, we're going to pass that. That passed this year. In the wake of Parkland, what you saw is a couple of different ideas on how to do this. And there is one bill that's still alive today, Senate Bill 6620, which tries to take a holistic approach to school safety. And it does three main things. It works with law enforcement to create school plans, school-specific emergency plans. And then it does two things in the realm of guns. It would raise the age at which you can buy a semi-automatic rifle from 18 up to 21. And then it also would subject people wanting to buy a rifle to the same background checks as those who buy a pistol or handgun. That bill has cleared the Senate committee and it's on the Senate floor, but it has not moved over, and time is pretty tight this year for that to move out of the Senate. The House would also have to pass it, and it would have to be done by midnight tonight. I don't know how many people are holding their breath that they can do that in the time available today. But to your specific question, yeah, I think that you're going to continue to see better and more strict gun control measures introduced. And that gets to kind of the next stage of what happens after the legislative session. We have a campaign this year. Typically, Democrats are more in line with gun control policies than Republicans. If Democrats pick up a few more seats in the legislature and head into 2019 with a larger majority down here, you could very well see a few more of these efforts and proposals actually pass through the legislature and become law.
So, do you think that these bills might pass either next year or this year?
I think that I would not hold your breath on anything else passing this year, just because of the timing. We really are down to the final day. They'll be done by midnight tonight. Now, it's possible, and I know that there are people working on this to see if that bill can get some traction on the final day here. But in the future, I do think you're going to see more gun control measures introduced and passed, probably in the coming years. This problem, as you guys well know, doesn't seem to be going away. The other interesting issue here on gun control is you have some people on the other side, and I don't know if this class has talked about the idea of arming teachers and school personnel, but that's another one proposal on the other side of the gun control issue of, hey, maybe we don't need fewer guns, maybe we just need folks to carry in classrooms and things like that. We've actually had a couple of legislators here in Olympia propose that idea, that teachers and school administrators, if they go through training courses, would then be allowed to carry a weapon on themselves. And so you're going to see a lot of different ideas on this. And, to your question, do I think something will pass in the future? Yeah, I don't think that we probably won't see anything today just because of the short time, although it's still possible. But heading into next year, it's going to be a long session. And especially if the Democrats pick up a few seats, a few of the key legislative races across the state, then I think you could very easily see something come back next year.
Thanks. One more question, just taking a different turn.
Yep.
If initiatives pass, did they always become law?
So if an initiative is enacted, if it's passed by a majority of the voters, then that does become law. And initiatives cannot be altered for 2 years by the legislature except by a 2/3 majority. And trying to get 2/3 of these guys to agree on anything is pretty tough. It's tough enough to get a simple majority of them to agree. And so if an initiative is passed by 50% plus one folks, of the voters out there, then it will become law, and they're not going to be able to amend it for at least 2 years unless they can convince 2/3 of all the legislators down here to do that.
Thank you.
So a lot of the students had asked, well, not a lot of them, but a few of them had asked about Tim Eyman and, who can promote initiatives and, what it takes to propose them, who's most likely to succeed in initiatives.
Yeah. So initiatives come from a few different places. And we have a couple of different types of initiatives here in Washington State. We also have referendum clauses on certain bills. And so taking them in turn, so what you see from Tim Eyman and a lot of other folks is, I don't know if anybody in this class has gone to the Secretary of State's website and looked at the initiatives that have been filed.
They all did.
Yeah, so you probably see Tim Eyman's name on there an awful lot. He's got, I think he's probably filed at least half or more than half of all the initiatives out there. He's not going to collect signatures on all of those. Not all of those are going to go to the ballot. What he is going to do, because he's paid to do this, it's his job, what he does is he goes out and he tries to find businesses or other like-minded investors to contribute financially to his effort. And once he has that, then he'll go out, hire signature gatherers to stand outside the grocery stores, things like that. And that's a business model that's worked really well for him. And it's also worked well for a lot of his causes, which typically tend to be a little bit more on the conservative anti-tax side of things. Tim Eyman hasn't exactly had a lot of success recently, though. He seems to have hit his peak. And over the last couple of years, some of the initiatives that he has pushed for, he has not been able to get enough signatures, or even if he has, they've gone down and failed at the ballot box in November. And so just because you get the signatures doesn't mean you're going to pass it. And just because you have somebody with a big name and a lot of money behind it, like Tim Eyman, doesn't mean you're even going to get the signatures that you need up front to do that. And so, beyond someone like, Mr. Eyman, who is often down here in Olympia testifying on bills, and he's very engaged in the process. Beyond that, you have groups like the Clean Energy group that's pushing the carbon tax. It's a stakeholder group of people who have come together, environmental activists. There have been a couple of tribes that have been involved, that have all come together to try to work on what they would like to see in an ideal carbon tax policy. So they came together, helped draft this long initiative that took weeks, months to put together, and then only after the legislative process failed did they decide to go ahead and file that. And now they've got commitments from a number of folks who are going to help fund that to, again, hire those signature gatherers that you might need. And it's just like another campaign. They have fundraising, they have expenditures, they have advertising, trying to convince people that this is the right way to vote in Olympia, or not in Olympia, but in November at the ballot.
Okay, and there was one more question that I had, and a few people expressed this too, but were there any bills that you worked on this year that passed, or that you were happy with how far they got in committees, or
So
like that?
without boring you, because a lot of the stuff that I've worked on this year is probably not the most exciting, but I probably have somewhere between half a dozen to a dozen bills that I specifically worked on and helped push that have passed the legislature and are going to the governor for signature. We had a couple of tribal bills that we worked on. We had a bill to allow tribal teachers to opt in or tribal schools to opt into the state teacher retirement system. That bill's going to the governor for signature. I had a bill on a number of issues for the fire service that we worked on that's moving, that has already passed or have already passed. I had a bill for a client, Kitsap Transit, that passed. And so, they're, like I said, a lot of them are kind of detail oriented, unless you want to get into the weeds on what a contractor bond is and what percentage a contractor has to put forward in a bond if they want to bid on a public works project for a transit agency. But those are a lot of the things that I've done this year, and we had a pretty good year. It's been short sessions, like we said at the outset. They are sprints, not marathons. This session came and went very quickly. 60 days consecutive, as you guys saw. Even if we didn't meet for 2 weeks, the bills that you were looking at, completely different. It may have already passed by then. Obviously, the net neutrality bill passed and was signed into law by the governor. That's something that a lot of people were very happy with, and I think is something that the class here did a really good job of parsing through a really complicated issue. Some of the other bills that this class had looked at, 6219 on women's reproductive health, that passed and is waiting for signature at the governor's desk right now. And so a lot of the things that were introduced this year didn't necessarily pass, but you also had a large number of bills go to the governor. And so between now and the end of the month, he's going to have 20 days after the end of session to go ahead and sign all of these bills or veto them, as he did with the public records bill that passed a week or two ago. And so it's going to be a busy time for the governor's office now, parsing through all the bills, some of which you guys have looked at and probably know more than a lot of folks on. And so I want to commend you guys for picking very interesting and complicated issues. I was not really sure what to expect, to be perfectly honest, but I was really pleasantly surprised. You guys did a really great job of parsing through the issues, and I had kind of a general question for you guys as to, why did you pick the bills that you did? Carbon tax, net neutrality, things like that. Those are really complicated issues. Was there any particular reason why you gravitated towards those?
No, our teacher told us to.
Either that, or you just wanted to make my life complicated because you picked a bill that's 80 pages long. Now, a lot of the bills that come through here are anywhere from 1 line long to hundreds of pages of long. And they're all varying degrees of complexity and nuance. And I do want to give you guys a lot of credit for picking issues that are interesting, picking issues that are complicated, and really diving into some of the bigger policy questions and policy issues that this 2018 legislature had to grapple with. So you should all be proud of that.
Well, thank you. I want to ask them though, how many of you are in DigiTools?
All of us.
And how many of you discussed net neutrality in DigiTools and were fired up about it and talked about it in class? The more of you should have been raising your hand, because that's what that's another reason why I encourage that.
I'm just used to I don't get fined.
They take a computer class and had come in talking about that and stuff like that. So that's one of the reasons why we picked the net neutrality bill.
Definitely one of the biggest hot button issues of this legislative session. And you can tell because of how quickly it passed, and the governor has already signed it into law. And now I guess we'll see what the federal government does, since one of their arguments was that states don't have the authority to do this. You'll recall that the feds did claim a certain level of preemption on this issue. And so it'll be interesting to see if the current law that we passed here in the state is going to be replicated in other states, or if the feds are going to come down and say, no dice, didn't work that way. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Okay, well, thank you so much for all your hard work and for spending time with us.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I hope it was okay for you guys, and hope you learned a little bit.
Thank you.